Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining me from. My name is Kamoye Benjamin. I identify as a peak performance coach, and what that means is I come alongside people, individuals or teams, and help them deploy them at the optimum mindset and skill set in order to create more, whatever more represents, whether more income, more impact, more decisiveness, more clarity, more awareness, whatever more represents. And it's always a peak performance conversation. And in today's episode of Peak Performance Secrets, I want to be talking to you about whether you've been held back by fear, how to identify those greatest fear triggers. I'm going to walk you through 3 main fear triggers that we as human beings have. And in the process, you can identify where your greatest fear actually comes from. And then number 2, I'll help you very briefly. This short teaching is not does not have the capacity to kind of unpack the whole science behind internal assumptions and how they limit how you lead as an individual. And so what I want you to do is I want you to join me very quickly. I'm going to be diving in as we talk about held back by fear. And the first thing that I want to share is this. Every emotion has impact. Every emotion has a trigger. And every emotion has an impact range. If you look at the image that I have here, you can see in the background something that looks like a gun, and there's a trigger right here. There's a trigger right here, And what this means is that before any emotion is triggered. And what is an emotion? We defined an emotion in a previous series that I did about fear, that an emotion is a signal. Every emotion is a signal. And that signal is created and delivered to you through a chemical dump into your system and electrical charge into your system. These two drop into your system and they cause you to become aware of certain emotions. And what does a signal require from you? A signal requires action. And so if you are sensing that you're happy, your body is going to respond in the same way. You will smile, your eyes will dilate, and your cheeks will kind of lighten up a bit, and your heart will be glad, your muscles will relax. That is the chemical and electrical charge deposited into your system. So every emotion has a trigger. Happiness, sadness, disappointment, anger. Every emotion has a trigger. A trigger is what causes it. And that always comes back into our thinking mind as we pick up information from our world using the 5 senses. We make meaning of that information. And when we make meaning of that information, a certain emotion is triggered, which is the chemical and electrical charge into our system. Now, every emotion, when it has been acted out, when the chemical dumping is in your system, whether you smile, that has an impact on people. If you become angry and you have rage and you shout and scream at people, that is impact. And in today's conversation, when you feel fear, that emotion of fear has a range of impact. For some people, when they're going on stage and they're about to speak and they take up a microphone, they feel fear. That fear is an emotion. It's been triggered by something that you've thought about. And we're going to talk about the triggers right now for fear. But I want you to see the impact is that for some people, it literally hijacks them. They're not able to speak. They forget their lines. For musicians, you've heard that. For people who are standing in front of a group and they're about to do a presentation, their confidence drops to the floor. They forget the presentation they were making. All of a sudden, their hands, their palms are sweaty. They're completely hijacked in the process. And they're not as effective as they could have been. Why? Because they got hijacked by fear. That is an emotion and it has an impact range. So when we're talking about you being held back by fear, you've got to recognize, what is this emotion? What is this emotion that I sense, and how How does it get triggered? And how does it impact me in my day-to-day life? And therefore now, to master and identify your fear triggers, we need to look at this grid right here. Something interesting is about to pan out, so follow me closely. The self-determination theory really talks about three basic kind of needs or drivers for us as human beings. And I want to help you connect this to fear, because in where you have your greatest need as a human being, that is where you sense threat. That is what you need to protect the most. Your greatest source of a need as a human being. And we've got three. I'm going to talk about them shortly. Where you've got the greatest sense of need as a belonging, that is what you seek to protect the most. And because that is what you seek to protect the most, that is where you become notified of a threat the most. And that consequently becomes your greatest source of fear. Do you follow that? Let me see how we can unpack this. Three core needs. The first one is autonomy. We all have a need for autonomy. Autonomy here speaks about I am a unique individual being able to control my own life and make the decisions in my life. That is the first basic need of human beings. The second thing is belonging. We have a need for belonging. A basic need to connect with others, to belong to a community, to belong to people, to be loved, to be liked, and to be accepted. That's a core need that we have as human beings, all right? The third one is competence. In other words, to apply ourselves and make something happen, create a solution, solve a problem, be meaningful. We have innately the need for all these three: autonomy, belonging, and competence. Let me simplify it by looking at these three R's that really now begin to form our identity. You see, as we're growing up at around age 18, when we are teenagers, we really begin to kind of identify, who am I? What makes me me? In a classroom setup, when children are growing up, they're sizing each other up. And it's not just on the playground of life, but also in the office. You've seen this in organizations, in public spaces, even in families. People begin to say, wait a minute, my brother is the choppy one. They're the sharp one. They're the book smart one. Okay, that's them. Okay, I'm not that. Then who am I? Then I must be the relationship guy or girl. I must be this person who really gets along with people. And we quickly are trying to find who we are based again on these three basic needs. And so for autonomy, we begin to identify ourselves with our reason. And by reason, I mean our head strengths. We are smart. These are head strengths. We are identifying ourselves with that head strength, our reason. With belonging, we draw ourselves in the direction, we move in the direction of belonging, and we build our identity around relationships. And these are our heart strengths. And so you find that, you know what, you're the person who connects with people, you're the person who gets along with people, and you build an identity structure around relationships. The third one is competence. And so what is the identity structure around? It's around results. It's getting stuff done. And so what you do is you step into the world and you take your power and you make things happen. And that makes you you. Remember, how do we learn to fear? How do we develop fear? We develop fear by the associations that you make, that this is risky. And so your mind picks up that information and says, whenever I notice that that has been threatened, there's a threat in this area, I will notify you and I will bring up fear for you and I will cause you to become alert that yes, there is a threat right here. And so when you go back to these three core human needs, you begin to find our identity strengths. Now, where does the fear factor come in? Follow me here for a moment. If your identity is around reason, what do you fear the most? If your identity is around your head strength, it's around knowing, it's about having answers, what do you fear the most? Your greatest fear is in looking foolish or appearing foolish. That's your greatest fear. I don't want to look foolish. And so when that is threatened, you lose your composure. When you stand in front of an audience and you're about to speak in front of an audience and you want to appear that you know all the answers. Even when someone in the audience asks you a question and you don't know the answer, you're more concerned about, oh my goodness, how am I looking now? I'm looking foolish. No. Watch out for that. That could be your greatest fear trigger, looking foolish. For belonging and relationships, if your identity structure is so much around relationships, and please understand something here. We all have these three core strengths, but we don't always identify ourselves with all three at the same time. We have one that we use to identify ourselves. It's our core driver. For me, results are where I identify myself with the most. I take my power in the world to create whatever it is that I want. And so you've got to identify which of these three do you identify with at the core. Where do you take this strength and find that it kind of identifies who you are? Let's look at belonging. The key idea here is rejection. For belonging, the greatest fear is rejection. The greatest fear is disapproval. For belonging. If your heart strength is around relationships, your greatest fear is rejection. And so when you become aware of possibility in rejection, your greatest fear gets triggered. That's why you find it hard to give, constructive feedback. That's why you find it hard to get into conflict. That's why you find it hard to tell people what you need to tell them, even when they are hurting you. You're afraid that they're going to reject you, and you seek to avoid that the most. And so fear gets triggered. Remember, an emotion is a signal to take action. And fear is an emotion that causes you to become aware of a threat. Let's look at the final one here. I don't want to take a lot of time. Competence is a core need. You identify yourself around results like I do. My greatest fear is failure. And we all fear failure in different dimensions, but it impacts us differently. Remember what I shared with you. Every emotion has impact range. If the fear of failure grips me, you do not want to know the lengths and the extents to which I will go to avoid that failure. Why? Because my identity structure is around my results. So failing is like death. For me to be is to be achieving and creating results. And so when you look at these core human needs right here, you begin to see the identity structure around them. And also, more importantly, the fear that gets triggered the most. And so as we're talking about this conversation of have you been held back by fear, you've got to be able to identify your greatest fear triggers. And as I've shared with you, they come from noticing what exactly your core needs are. And that's the key idea. Now, let's look at this very quickly. Each of these has got a core underlying assumption. And the biggest underlying assumption, and I'm going to share it with you, it's going to be so simple, you're going to get it immediately. You don't need to read 40 books. You're going to get it immediately. The core need, let's duplicate this. Let's duplicate this very quickly. Jump and duplicate. Yeah, there we go. So I wanted to delete all this. Can I do that? Give me a second. I want to delete. No, I don't want to delete anything. I'm going to find another color. Okay. Oh, this is so precious for me. I just want to bring in another color. Let's bring that light one. Okay. So the core assumption in relationships, reason, and results can be found in this. Simply add the word I am my results. I am my reason. I am my relationships. I am my results. That is the core assumption and belief. Remember, you've built your identity structure around reason, relationships, and results. And therefore, the assumption that you have is that you are your reason. And in identity conversation, one of the things that I ask my coaching clients is this: who are you outside of your core gift? Are you your results? Are you your results? I mean, do your results, which are outside of you, have the power to create you, your identity? Is it you who creates results, or it's results that create you? And most clients get to that awareness of, wait a minute, I'm not my results, I'm Benjamin. I create results, but those results don't make me. And so right there you see the underlying assumption that I am my results and my results are me, which is a complete lie. And so equally, when you look at this, and I wanted to take the shortest time possible to just give you the big scoop here. You're not your reason. That's the big assumption. You're not your reason. You're not your head strengths. You're not knowing. You're you. You're you. And so you need to identify you outside of your strength, which is reason. You need to identify you outside of your strength, which is relationships. And you need to identify you outside of your strength, which is results. I hope that this has served you today to help you understand how to identify why fear and which fear holds you back the most. Because remember, as I said, where your greatest need is also where your greatest fear exists. Thank you so much for tuning in today. My name is Kamoye Benjamin. I'd like for you to tune in tomorrow, weekdays, as I teach more about how to deploy yourself for peak performance. If you've not subscribed to my YouTube channel, kindly go ahead and do that so that you can also receive a notification every time I post a video. I do that mainly every weekday of the week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be well until the next session. Bye for now.